This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. Oftentimes, when it comes to public discourse, especially in sports, perception creates a false feeling of reality when it comes to a certain player, right? Certain players' good things might get lost because they're lost in the shuffle of other good things happening with other players that they might be compared to. Some bad things with players might be lost because they're being compared to other players who are much worse than them. So comparatively, they look good. This is something that happened with Mason Graham. Because the Browns' 2025 draft class was not just good, but so immediately good. So many players who jumped to production levels that you would think they would get maybe 2 or 3 years into their career, like Harold Fannin and Carson Schlesinger, that did it instantly. You even talk about Quincy Judkins being in that mix, that when you look at somebody in that same class who showed promise that you expect from a rookie, but not at that accelerated level or an early level, you tend to downplay or discount what that player was able to achieve in their rookie year. But when it comes to Mason Graham, I think we're doing him a disservice. And of all the rookies from last year, I really do think that Mason Graham is somebody that Browns fans in general really ought to be more excited about, because there are some things that we saw from Mason Graham's season in context that make what he did even more impressive. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Mason Graham went on the record this week and disclosed that he broke his ribs after the Tennessee game. Well, at the Tennessee game. He had injured his ribs during the San Francisco game and then broke his ribs in the Tennessee game. And then from there on out, he played a lot of snaps, mind you, at the defensive tackle position while having broken ribs, which obviously affects his play. We've also talked about the leap that Mason Graham had from the bye week, from where he was at the beginning of the season to where he was after the bye week. And I think if we look at what Mason Graham was able to do from the bye week till before he broke his ribs, it really does shed light on what Mason could be in the future. We look at those 4 weeks, right? After the bye week where he had made his leap and before he broke his ribs, he was playing at an elite level for a defensive tackle, let alone a rookie defensive tackle. He had a 21.3% pass rush win rate on true pass sets. So true pass sets are like actual opportunities you get to rush the passer. If you've watched defensive tackle film, you know why there is this need for distinction between just a pass set and a true pass set, because oftentimes you're not given an opportunity to really get a pressure on a quarterback because the ball gets out quick or they move the pocket away from you or something along those lines. So true pass sets is a way of just rating the opportunities that you actually had to rush the passer. And on 21% of those opportunities, he was able to win his battle on the line of scrimmage. If you measure that with other defensive tackles who had over 100 pass rush snaps in the NFL in that period of time, that was the 4th best pass rush win rate from a defensive tackle in the NFL. He also, in that same stretch, had 16 pressures in those 4 games, which was the most of any defensive tackle with over 100 pass rush snaps in the NFL at that time. He had a PRP. If you don't know what a PRP is basically a combination of pressures, hurries, sacks that measure how disruptive you were to the quarterback position when you were out there, and puts it in a nice little rate. And he had a PRP of 11.7, which was second in the NFL in that same time period. When it comes to run defense, where he has his most work to do, he still was playing at a high level. 10 run stops in those 4 weeks, which was the third best in the NFL, and a run stop percentage of 13.3, which was 12th best in the NFL. The blueprint, the proof of concept of Mason Graham as an elite defensive tackle, that's what it is right there. And keep in mind, defensive tackle is a position that traditionally takes until you're about 24, 25, when you have your grown man strength to really get those kind of results. Again, I can point to you many other defensive tackles that did not get to that level of play until they were about that age. Somebody like Derek Brown, who was an early draft pick for the Carolina Panthers, is a great example of this, where he is now an elite defensive tackle, but the narrative about him early was a little bit wonky. And that's just because of the nature of the defensive tackle position. You have to play with a lot of strength. You're dealing with the most grown men on the football field that you could deal with from a college age. And there's just no comp from playing college football to the NFL on the line of scrimmage. It's just way harder than any other transition other than quarterback, right? So this is a position where you're not expected to look amazing early. We talked about this when we drafted Mason Graham, that was part of the expectation built in. But already after about 8 weeks, he put together, before he broke his ribs, a proof of concept of elite defensive tackle play that I think we should be really, really excited about. I'll talk about this more, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. Which brings me back to the point that I had at the beginning of this video, right? When you ask a question of like, why is the public perception of Mason Graham not the same as other rookies on this team that flash, they could play at a high level or an elite level, right? Carson Swetzinger has obviously showed flashes of an elite player in the future. We've seen that from Quincy Judkins. We've seen that from somebody like Harold Fannin, right? But why isn't Mason thrown in that same category? One, there's the obvious answer. One, that people just don't really understand the nuances of line of scrimmage play, the timelines of players on the line of scrimmage being different. Wide receiver is a position where the impact is obvious to anybody watching the game. You don't have to watch all 22 to understand why Jamar Chase is useful for the Cincinnati Bengals. But you do have to watch all 22 to understand why Joe Thomas is one of the best left tackles of all time. Or, why somebody like DJ Reader, when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl, was probably one of the 2 or 3 most important players on that roster outside of Joe Burrow. No, the impact isn't obvious, but it doesn't mean that the impact is small just because it's not obvious on a television broadcast. It just means your ability to appreciate it if you're a casual fan is diminished, which is part of what's going on with Mason. A lot of what he does and his impact is more difficult for a casual fan to notice because he does play the defensive tackle position. And look, this even happens with edge rushers, because I had to have the debate on this channel about the impact of Myles Garrett before he became so good that it was undeniable to people. But there was like a long period of time where people were trying to convince me that Myles wasn't that good because they simply couldn't see him passing the eye test. But the eye test is only as effective as how good your eye is. And the honest truth is that most people's casual eyes not really worth anything as far as evaluating what a team is doing well, what a team isn't doing well. Which is to say, especially along those defensive line positions or offensive line positions. So that's a huge part of it, right? A lot of people just won't appreciate defensive tackle play because it's not something they've been trained to appreciate like skill player play. Other part of this is when you do have players who do play positions that are more notable when they're flashing. Carson Schlesinger. Quincy Judkins, a running back, right? You have a tight end in Harold Fanning, your leading receiver, flashing. You're going to notice that stuff over your defensive tackle who's playing at an elite level as well. Because, again, it's easier to notice a linebacker because they're getting involved in plays on the boundary. It's easier to notice a tight end because they're the leading receiver on the team. It's easier to notice Quincy Judkins because he's the most important player on the offense for a team that didn't have a quarterback last year. So all of those things kind of make you notice those guys. And then you look for what Mason Graham is doing. And because particularly last year he did not have sack production, mainly because he was sacrificing for Myles Garrett to get the sack record, that really painted how people viewed Mason Graham, because the only stat on the defensive line that people have been trained to appreciate is sack production, which admittedly Mason Graham, as good as some of his pass rush numbers were, was not a high producer as a sack getter last year. But we kind of know why, right? Myles Garrett broke the single season sack record. In order for that to happen, there's going to be sacrifices made along the defensive line, especially once that record became in reach. And it just so happens that that record became in reach at the exact same time that Mason Graham started to put it together at a high level as a pass rusher. I think that these things are pretty obvious once you train people to look at them, right? I don't think it's impossible to get a casual fan to understand the impact of the defensive tackle, because once you start pointing it out, it becomes fairly obvious just how critical a defensive tackle is to the impact of the defense. And you know, I've done these breakdowns, and whenever I do these breakdowns, I see a lot of people being like, I didn't know, right? That defensive tackle play was that important until somebody had explained it. So that's what I try to do on this channel, is explain why I do have praise for players, or why I'm not as high on players, not just by talking about it or just saying things, but backing that up with data and film study as well. So when it comes to Mason, I see a player that when I watch the tape, especially in that time frame, I get excited about what he's shown on tape. I see a player whose production at a abnormally young age, 22 years old, reached an elite level after the bye week and before his rib injury. And I see somebody who can become a blue chip player for the Cleveland Browns for a long time. And if that is what Mason Graham becomes, right? If he becomes a version of what Calais Campbell has been to so many teams, if he becomes a version of what Cam Hayward is to the Pittsburgh Steelers, then we're not going to look back at that pick at number 5 and think it was early for Mason Graham. We're going to think that we got appropriate value for that pick on top of getting a trade back with him. Also, remember these lessons we're learning when we're talking about Mason Graham, and make sure you apply it to Spencer Fano, because he also plays along the line of scrimmage, and that also comes with the same caveats that defensive tackle play comes with, right? Expect some of the criticism on Spencer in his rookie year to be a little bit unfair, right? Expect him to start a little bit slower than maybe you would want to. Expect his impact to not be as obvious, and therefore as hyped up as other players' impact who play obvious positions that are easy to hype up, right? Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston. Learn from what we have learned with Mason Graham, but understand you should definitely be more excited about Mason Graham than what you are right now. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.